Everyone. Hello, Ryan. A huge welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I am so looking forward to getting into this particular topic with you. As you know, it's become one of my, I don't even know how to describe it. But as you know, it's become one of my obsessions is probably the best way to describe it. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. In fact, I think I said to you about 5 times as we were chatting, like, stop, we need to save this conversation for the show, because I think we've both got this same just delight and love of this way of speaking about things and exploring life. So yeah, I'm really excited. So to give us a nice foundation from which to have this conversation, what I'd love if you could do is start by defining what we're going to refer to as the shadow needs, and also how you came about using them in the way that you do in your work.
Well, as we were talking about before, the term shadow really comes from Jungian psychoanalytic theory, and that presupposes that we have this experience of ourselves that is out of our conscious awareness, that fundamentally we are not aware of, that that drives our behaviors, that drives our experience of life. And his famous quote that says, that which is, and I'm probably butchering it slightly, but that which is not made conscious becomes destiny. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about shadow needs, we're really talking about wants or desires, needs of in ourselves that unconsciously drive our reactions and unconsciously drive our results by proxy. And so the shadow needs, we can think of them as kind of programs that we're running unconsciously, that we kind of have to work through and then release in order to see things clearly, and then act accordingly or act from that place. And so how did I come about these? Well, it was about, oh, sorry, I've got a cat running around here. So it was about, well, nearly 9 years ago, so quite some time ago, that I came upon the work of a guy named Lester Levinson. Cool. And he was a really, really cool guy, really interesting chap. And he was an engineer in New York City so I guess this must have been the 40s, and he was extremely successful, extremely well off, in the high bracket of his time, had loads of relationships, good relationships, or people that wanted to be in relationship with him, and he was ostensibly in a good period of life, but he was actually on death's door due to incredible stress and incredible physiological stress, and I believe he had a heart attack. And his doctor told him, you're not going to survive. Like, this is going to kill you. And so, as the story goes, he locked himself in his apartment, and came to the conclusion that even with his high intelligence, he couldn't actually figure out what was going on with him. And so I believe he read through all of the kind of spiritual texts and the Bhagavad Gita and all of these things that he had, and he was still trying to figure it out. And what he came up to was the fact that that there are these wants, these needs that he was experiencing, and that his consciousness was experiencing in life, that was seemingly causing him to act in certain ways or be in a certain way. And he resolved to sit in his apartment and release these needs until he was okay, or he would die. It was this fundamental kind of thing. So he placed himself in a position where he had to decide to release these. And so, as the story goes, he did. And so he had an awakening experience. He had a very, very powerful spiritual experience, and basically quit his job, quit his position, and started teaching this. And so this method, it became a couple of different methods, and there are a couple students of his teaching this understanding. And so one is called the releasing method, and one is called the Sedona method, quite famously. So taught by a guy named Hale Dwoskin, who was famously in The Secret. One of the teachers in that film. And when I came across these kind of understandings, and I'll describe them more in a moment, they had such a profound change in my life that I immediately began to start working with them. And I integrated them very deeply into my own work, and found ways of working with these understandings that went beyond just some of the ways that they teach them. So I used hypnotherapy, and I used some of the understandings of the way that the mind works to really make this a lot easier. And this is a fundamentally subtractive method or tool. And so you can actually think of these as techniques, but in a way, they're not techniques as much as kind of like tuning or understanding, or kind of moving away from ways of being in the world.
I think of them a bit like clues.
Yeah.
You know, they kind of alert you to something, and then what you want to do about that something, I guess, depends on who you are and the ways that are aligned for you to work. You know, for me, they are a clue to shadow, which I then work with in the way that I work with shadow. And it seems as though there's probably lots of ways you could work with it, but for me, it's that kind of indication of, this is that what did you call it? Not code, not pattern. What did you call it? You know what I mean, though. Basically, like a thing that's running out. Program, I think you called it.
Program.
Yeah, it's like a clue to a program, which you then can work with in a number of ways.
Right.
So does this feel like a good time to name what those needs are?
Sure. And I think it's useful to say just right off the bat that from a psychological, just a purely psychological, without getting into the kind of spiritual nature or the transcendent nature of this work, from a purely psychological basis, these are really, really well supported. So the first one is a need for control.
That's a little bit familiar to me, as you all know, Ryan.
Right. And so if we were to kind of think about working with another person, that dynamic would be, I'm triggered in a relationship. I'll just give an example. I'm triggered in a relationship, an interaction, and in order to kind of clean up that baggage, I'm really looking at, okay, did I try to control that person?
Mm-hmm.
And then letting it go would be, could I let go of wanting to control that person? Would I be willing to let go of wanting to control that person? And then when? And fundamentally, those are the three questions that Lester taught, which is, could I, would I be willing to, when?
Mm.
In the understanding that you and I and everyone else is going to have to let go at some point in
Mm-hmm.
life.
Yeah, even if it's death, like we could wait that
Even if
long.
it's that,
Yeah.
you could, or you could let go now. And there's always a choice. And so, or actually let go of the other side of that, which is wanting to control someone back or feeling control. So these two
Mm.
aspects. So the first one is control. The second one is security. So wanting to feel safe and secure. Um, the third one is approval. So the need for approval. And the fourth one is separation or oneness. So these are two sides of the same experience, wanting to be one with someone or separate from someone or some experience. And so what I found personally and in my own experience, and this is one thing that I've always been, really, really good at, is taking something and trying it out, just running with it and really, really putting it to use
Mm.
in my life as quickly and as effectively as I can. And what I found out is that there is indeed the existence and the reality of these programs, call them what they are, active. And we don't see them. They're unconscious most of the time, which from a Jungian standpoint, you could call that shadow. And so this is all about orientation, fundamentally. And Jung famously said, we never actually heal anything. We just let it go, which presupposes that we're not broken, that we're not patients.
Mm.
And and that change is about growth fundamentally. It's a very generative, beautifully generative
Mm.
way of working and way of
Definitely.
seeing life.
Mm. Yeah, which I'd say was Jung's view in general. It feels that, it's all generative. It's all about moving, individuation, becoming the fullness of who you came here to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the reason I've found these so powerful to work with, both personally and then also with people, is the way that it can act as this clue to quite subtle behaviors and what's beneath them. So if again we're talking about from a shadow perspective, this part of us that's in shadow but is exerting its influence over us in these needs. So we won't be conscious to what's in shadow that's creating them, but we'll be conscious to some degree or other to the need. Even if we're not yet able to name it that way, we're going to notice the urges within us. Oh, I need to do this, I need them to do that. And the reason I think these are so powerful is that, and we touched on this before we started recording, I think the times where we're like so triggered, it's really, it's obvious. If we've got any understanding of shadow, it's obvious there's something beneath that. But what I found, and the looking at these shadow needs, it can be helpful in those areas too. But what I found is particularly helpful is, particularly if we've already done some amount of work, where most of the time these things are going to come in more subtle flavors, where it's not necessarily going to be these kind of really big triggers, or in ways where it seems very believable. Like, of course, life should be this way. People should treat me this way. I should be doing X, Y, and Z. And for me, it was those kind of more like things that seemed true, that recognizing when these needs were at play were really helpful for me, because they were too subtle, because I wasn't really noticing that I was triggered. And so it was a really good lens into what was going on.
Absolutely. One of the things that a person comes to see, if you work with this and you really get this, is that it's so close. The idea of the shadow or the trigger itself can be so close and so visceral that you don't see it. You don't see it, and that's what makes it unconscious. It's not that it's in some strange, murky, unconscious mind somewhere down there, or wherever there is, or up there, or these are ways of talking about, of describing it. We're just using words. There is no down there. There is no up here. It is what it is. But actually, it's so close that you don't see it. It's like the nose on your face.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're seeing through it, aren't you, really? So it just becomes, it's something you're seeing everything through. Therefore, you can't see it.
And trying to, and as you said, like, if we've done a lot of work, and I assume, your listeners, a great majority of them are interested in even on this because they have done some work on themselves, or perhaps a lot of work on themselves. And we've all had these moments where there's a certain challenge. There is our usual toolkit, even the reflections that we're getting from a coach or a teacher or a therapist. And yet it's not working. It's not working. And we're still feeling what we're feeling. And it can almost feel as we get that thought, like, I've tried everything. I've done absolute, from the shaman to the exorcist to the psychiatrist and it's not shifting, and it feels like I'm going backwards. And in those moments, we can recognize that, we can ask ourselves, so what is the need? What is this actually coming from? And you might be surprised. You might go, actually, it's coming from a need of control. And so it's so visceral. And then you will have quite often in that moment an option of letting it go, of dropping it, even for a moment. And a shell falls away. It's like something drops. And in that moment, you have the option to do or not do. But you're coming from a fundamentally different place. And it's a much higher elevated awareness or consciousness of what's actually happening. Lester famously had this great phrase, which I like a lot, which he said, most people release to get high. So most people let go of stuff in order to feel better. And he would say, get high to release.
Oh, yeah, I like that. This leads me to, there's two different things I wanted to ask next. So I'm going to pick the one that most relates to this. So what I was just seeing is, it sounds as though, like, listeners to the show will likely be familiar with what I'm about to say to an extent, and you and I have spoken about this tons of times before. But if we look at this through the lens of, there's the ascension path where we are, in fact, it goes well with one of the shadow needs, actually, you know, oneness, that move to be at one with everything, to know ourselves as infinite spirit. And then there's also the descension into the soul, into the unique aspect of ourselves. And what it seems to me, our work is very much spanning both. So there's three aspects of the path of Awaken the Wild: one be ascension, one be descension, and the kind of middle of the two, the trunk of the tree, as it were, is around sovereignty. And I was just thinking, the interesting thing about the shadow needs is, it seems as though Lester was creating them, his way, his view on them, and his intention was around ascension, actually. And yet, interestingly, it feels as though they can absolutely be used also for descension, which is more how I use them, which I think is fascinating. I don't think there's that many things where you can use them for both. And so the reason I said this then was because when you said get high to release, I was thinking that more has been like an ascension, you know, to go up into spirit to release. But there's also, we can go, like the same is also true, potentially go down into our soul, into what we could call will to release.
Absolutely. When I think about descension into the individual, because that's what we're talking about, our individual life.
Yes.
It often seems like most of our issues are coming from being caught in some middle gray area between that experience of oneness and the experience of individualness. And we're kind of in this, okay, am I at one or am I separate from?
Yes. Yeah. An unconscious compromise.
Right. But I think it's useful to recognize the idea of individual itself means one. And so you are fully seated in your individual, so much so that you've come full circle and you're at one.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Yeah, clever. Yeah.
And that is what I genuinely believe is the fully sort of integrated path where you're able to connect with the transcendent and honor the personal, even when the personal is essentially essentially illusory in a way. And then you can use the illusion, use your illusion, as the Guns N' Roses, you know, famously said, album goes.
Those spiritual teachers that they are. Yeah. No, I love everything you just said. It's, I guess, really why you and I are both, you know, just absolutely in love with magic, because real magic, high magic, is what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And low magic, or we might call high magic, is ascension in a way. It's high magic is connecting, you know, we talk about ceremonial magic, and it is a way of connecting with spirit and unifying yourself with the absolute and all the levels of that. If you really understand Western esoteric traditions as being encompassing of very, very many levels, especially if you study Kabbalah, you know, you have all of these different focuses and these experiences that you can have, and the benefits and the pitfalls of working with one kind of exclusively. And you can have this whole thing. And low magic is how sort of low magic, if I want to put it like that, is how do I make my mundane life more comfortable or easier? And they're both extensions of the same thing. You don't the torso doesn't say to the legs, "Oh, you terrible lowly things down there. I'm higher than you, therefore more important." One stands on the other,
Yes.
and these are all extensions of our work. And even if you have no interest in, and that's perfectly fine, by the way, no interest. There's no law in the universe that says that you must do anything. Nowhere is it written. But if your real interest is in making your life work better, allowing it to work better, and using techniques or experiences to do that, hey, there's nothing more holy than that. Really, fundamentally.
What was coming to mind was Michael Beckwith's Four Stages of Consciousness. Um, and the first stage is that you could describe it as being on the victim triangle, really, where life is happening to you. And then the second stage is something like life is happening by me, as in there's like an agency there. There's an agent that's enacting their will on the world. Whether that be, doing manifesting kind of rituals and whatever. And then there's the stage 3 is life is happening for me. So that kind of like, oh, it's, whatever's happening is happening for me. And then the fourth stage of consciousness is life is happening as me, which is really, the true magician, center of the universe, creating. And it's interesting how that stage 4 can look like the stage 2 in some ways. Some of the actions that someone from stage 4 might be taking could look like what's happening at stage 2, which is that kind of, enacting their will on the world, but the will is coming from I guess divine will, from that understanding of the one being the unique and the all.
I love that. The way that I think about this and the way that many teachers talk about this is aligning or tuning your personal will, your individual life set with divine will, or if you would call it nature. And it's about literally becoming natural, living your own, knowing yourself so well that you decide to use this time on this earth, which is basically all we get. We get our time, and we get the resources that we have, and we get our consciousness. And so the magician is that person that awakens to not only the path, but awakens to them being the center of the universe. You are the center of the universe. You are the center of your universe. And there's no moral judgment in that. It's just the way it is. But you get the chance to live that. And I think, all those stages look like they're kind of progressive, and in a sense they really are, but they're also the way it is at different stages in your development. And some people say, well, why do I have to learn all this stuff if I can? Why can't I just be the universe and just allow things to happen? And the truth is, you can, and you do already, whether you're aware of it or not. And this understanding So understanding what we're calling the shadow needs really frees up a lot of that stuff. And so you're actually able to live in alignment with the way things are. And there's this kind of step up. And the step up doesn't mean not acknowledging the step down. So, when you're really recognizing, wow, these needs are in play in my relationships, in my business, in my ability to create, in my sexual relationships, in my relationships with my family, relationships with my body, my life. Then there's fundamentally no separation between. You don't have to have a conversation, whether this is psychological or spiritual or magical. It just is life.
Yes,
And
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, you brought me to the other thing that I wanted us to touch on, which is the way I name this, and I'd love to know how you'd name this, is those shadow needs are ultimately, you could say, about feeling safe, and I think you named it more like feeling, if you're feeling broken, to feel whole, I guess. And I think they're one and two are the same thing, really, but it's like that I don't feel safe as I am. And this again is why it's shadow. The shadow has us not feel that things being as they are going to be safe. And so in order to feel safe, I need to have control, or I need to have approval. And a couple of things I think might be helpful to see is how, firstly, they can kind of overlap in that it could be, for example, I need to control people so they approve of me, so that I feel safe. And so sometimes it kind of be like we can see one leads to another, or how they're kind of overlapping in this way. And I think this is why the security one is a particularly, it almost seems like sometimes they all lead to the security need. And I think that's why it's helpful to recognize when we're talking about security in this shadow need sense, it's illusionary security. It's not the true inner security of knowing ourselves as whole, knowing ourselves as the center of the universe.
Yeah.
So say whatever you want on any of that.
Oh, I mean, and you really, I really think that you've touched on something really important there, because although these are all at play in different moments. And I mean, someone asks you, in a given situation, what need looks like it's at play here? Is it control? Is it security? Or is it approval? And you'll just go, yes.
All of the things. I'll have all of those, please.
and so it's just, okay, choose which one you feel like letting go of. And it does come down, I really do think it does come down, you're right about that, it comes down to security. And even deeper than that, it's, so you might say, well, why don't I feel secure? And then you might say, well, we're born into life. We're fundamentally, as physical beings, needing to be, taken care of for a long period of time. If you look at other animals, we're fundamentally, physically kind of delicate, right? That's what it looks like. And so we're always trying to find ways of making ourselves secure. And if we believe, and goes down to an understanding and orientation, if we believe that we're the body, if our fundamental sense of identification is in the material, I mean, it only makes sense.
Yes.
It's a logical thing that we'd be looking for more and more security.
Yeah.
And so that's why in a way, this is a fundamentally spiritual tool rather than just a psychological tool, because it's pulling you away from the illusion that materialism is the set point of life.
Yes, I love this. I love that you brought it here. So, I think this is a really helpful thing to touch on as listeners are hearing this and thinking, this is something I can use in my own life. What I notice can happen is we arrive at a point where it could be, it's either the thing looks so true, but this is genuinely going to risk my security, which is why what you've just said, I think, is so powerful. Like, this isn't about managing the material world to keep your material being safe. This, again, is fundamentally a spiritual, for want of a better word, way of being. And there is there's something in what we're talking about here that could be seen as a form of bypassing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, okay, well, it doesn't matter if my material form gets obliterated because I'm not that. And so I'd love for you to speak to what's different here. I mean, it could be definitely used as a form of bypassing, but that's definitely not how you and I are holding it. So would you be able to speak directly to that, please?
Well, when I hear meditation teachers, and I've been guilty of it myself in the past, saying, well, I am not the body. Mm-hmm. What they're really saying is disidentify with the experience of body as being the only center of who it is you are.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so they would say, well, I'm not the body, I have a body, which kind of, so that's the second point. And if you believe that you're not somehow the body, or that the body is not important to your spiritual or experience, then this work is not for you, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think what you said earlier about the Kabbalah is so yes. helpful here. It's like, exactly. Yeah, it's not saying the body is irrelevant, not important, illusion. It's saying I have a body, and it's the and part that this is allowing us to come back into connection with.
Absolutely. You in Kabbalic, kind of, in the Kabbalah, the physical gross world is called Malkuth, and it's necessary for life and existence and experience. It's that dimension. It's not like the Buddhist or certain kinds of Buddhist, and that may not be the original kind of idea, but the idea of samsara, the illusion and living in the world. And so the bypass is, okay, when I touch enlightenment, then all my suffering is gone and I'm not. And so that's also bypass. And it comes down to that same thing. If you believe life is a problem and the suffering is a problem, and you want to run away from it, so you want to not be, that's bypassing. And if you think life is so physical, life is so great that I always want to be, and I want to be immortal, that's also a problem. And really, it's like looking into the illusion of existence itself. And that's why I say it goes all the way. And you can touch in with that transcendent experience, as well as be fully in the world and be fully engaged. and not let that the world be unholy, fundamentally
Yes.
separate.
Yeah. Mm.
That's the tantric path, right? Traditionally, that is the tantric path. When people talk about tantra as being about sexuality, that's a really powerful application, but that's just one of 112 different paths in the traditional um, tantric, sort of Indian tantric path, and that's all about fundamentally bringing spirit down into matter.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. Mm. I was just as you were talking, I was thinking again how, I guess, like, what's this for? What does this um allow us to experience differently? And because it does feel like almost a sacrifice. Just speaking personally, how when I was enacting those programs of control, which was kind of my, and would you say this is often the case? I noticed that from the work I've done with people using this perspective, that most of us tend to have like one shadow need that is our kind of home. I mean, we can definitely go across the others, but we have one that's like a particularly sticky one for us.
Mm.
Um, and mine being control, it felt sometimes almost like a sacrifice to give that up. It's just like, oh, but I can have everything I want when I so charmingly invite the world into me controlling them. And
Mm.
it did feel a sacrifice of sorts to let go of that. And it was a sacrifice that was, and it's not like it's over. There's times obviously where I'm given that choice again, but that sacrifice, what that allowed me to taste and experience was this, and is this experience of being, I guess, in a kind of much more like direct relationship to life, where I'm
Mm.
able to like fully experience what's here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Thank you, and thank you for saying that. Well, I appreciate you, speaking that out into the world, because that in itself is liberating for a lot of people. I know that just honoring the fact that, this is my set point, and I'm working with it like this, and beyond that, there's this experience, and it exists, and it's wonderful.
mm,
And what's the fear then about letting go? Because the fear is telling you that there's
life
this
will be
thing.
worse.
Yeah,
A lot
life will be
worse,
worse,
won't it? Yeah. Like
right?
without me controlling it, life will be a hell of a lot worse.
Right, and that's a real fear. It's like
Yes.
we're stuck in it, and we're
Mm,
stuck in an experience of control or fear. It's not the fear of. It's not just the fear uh, of um, of the thing sort of happening or not happening. It's the fear that if anything shifts, this is going to get worse.
mm.
And so that's fear is fundamentally, if there was an underlying thing, it's fear.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah, simply put, all of these are just manifestations of fear or love. And I
Absolutely.
think there's times where it's really helpful to see that's that's at play. And there's times where it's really helpful to see the different faces that fear takes.
So in that moment where you're stuck, where it really does look like a sacrifice, like you're giving something up. In my experience, and this is, by the way, present in deep shamanic work, and anybody that's done medicine work, working with plant medicine, many people often have this experience where you're invited to let something go, and it feels terrifying. And the moment that you do let it go, from a higher perspective, it's just a joke. it looks like the biggest cosmic joke, because there never was any control. The idea that you could control anything is
Yes.
just a
Yeah.
just a
Oh, I
big
love
joke,
that.
and you have a big laugh, and everybody has a big
Mm.
laugh, and then the ceremony ends and you get back on life, and if you're lucky, you can integrate that understanding into your life that makes a difference, and recall it and remember it and make that a practice, to the point where you embody it. But because of the nature of the illusion itself, we all get caught. And that's why this becomes a practice, and you don't just get to go there, embody that, imbue it, and then walk into life with that kind of installed as a
Mm.
permanent feature. And some people do, actually. There are people for whom they let that go, and that's it, and they have to work on other things.
Yeah, I was just thinking, isn't there? I mean, we're probably wandering into like a whole other territory, but let's just finish this part
hmm,
because it's interesting. Um, I was seeing that I tend to be someone who makes quite big leaps in terms of integrating a lot quite completely,
yeah,
and some people it's a bit more gradual. And I think even if you're someone like me that tends to make kind of like those leaps and it feels as though, okay, I'm done with that, we also do spiral round and then kind of find ourselves with a kind of a deeper or different aspect of that
yeah.
pattern. And you're like, I thought I dealt with this, here it is again. And so it feels to me it's really the same stuff, kind of just playing itself out wearing different masks.
And oh, totally. And as you let go of this stuff, or you do this work, it's like an onion. You peel it off and you peel it off, and you get into deeper and deeper, more subtle versions of this.
Yes. Yeah.
And um, the highs can be greater, but also the capacity for going deeper into aspects of shadow are greater. And you're
Mm.
quite often faced with monsters, quote unquote monsters. You're faced with aspects of yourself that are very, very difficult to look at, and um, and yet when you do, you get a chance to see that quote unquote monster, that part of, is just a part of you. And this is the Jungian understanding, is that it's a part of you that fundamentally needs to be accepted.
Mm. You just you made another Jung quote come to mind, and I think this is actually a really beautiful place for us to move to a close. As you were saying that, the quote goes something like, "Every part of us that we do not love regresses and becomes more primitive."
Mhm.
And so, yeah, the longer these parts of us have remained unloved, the kind of more demonic they'll appear.
Mm,
And the wonderful thing is, as we travel deeper on this path, we have more love. We can bring more love to these parts of us.
capacity, totally. Your capacity for being able to hold those parts of you um, grows exponentially with each
Mm.
win and each step in that direction. And because it is a spiral down, but it's a spiral up. And I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, yeah,
And you realize that what you thought you were giving up is, what was seeming sacrifice is actually a gateway into more of you.
yeah.
And it dissolves for as long as it does.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, just as you were saying, that was like we give up fool's gold for real gold.
Mm,
Mm, yeah, just talking personally, I can see how I gave I gave up, and again, the practice is to notice the place where I'm still needing control, but I give up control to have power. And when I say power, I mean power in the deepest sense, you know, love, will, ability to create.
Isn't it so wonderful to know that in the simple act of letting go, you can have the entire force of nature itself behind you. You know?
Salesman of the century right there, right? Well, I think you've brought us perfectly to a close there. Thank you. Wow, I've just absolutely loved this conversation. Thank you. I feel like we've just done a tour around the universe and back.
The best tour.
Yeah.
Ryanair. much better than Ryanair.
So if listeners would like to find out more about Ryanair and how they can fly on you, where could they go?
So my main site at the moment is hypnotherapyinbarcelona.com. That's my main site, which is undergoing a redesign at the moment. But you can find me there. Drop me a message. I'm on Facebook, and feel free to add me. And those are the main ways of getting in touch.
And if
I'm on Instagram as well.
Yeah, and I can't recommend listeners do that highly enough. And just to say, as they would have heard in this conversation, don't let the kind of hypnotherapy in Barcelona make you think that's what you do and that's the entirety of what you do. Like the conversation we've had, I think, is a much better articulation of the work you really do.
Yeah, and of course I'm a work in progress, and my offerings are a work in progress. And that site, while it's very local to here, it attracts people from all over the world, and most of my clients are actually international.
Yeah. So you don't need to move to Barcelona to fly Ryanair.
Not at all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.